the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development, and we're pleased to host this webinar today. We have 4 speakers with us today. Cindy Fletcher is Professor and Extension Specialist in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies at Iowa State University. Jeanne Warning is Assistant Director to Families Extension at Iowa State University. Rosemary Heins is Extension Professor at the University of Minnesota. And Patricia Olson is Program Director of Extension at the University of Minnesota. And they partnered in this study with Lynette Flage at North Dakota State University, who will not be on the line today. I think, Cindy, you're first, so go right ahead.
I am. Thank you, Scott. And I want to take a second and say thank you to Scott and the North Central Regional Center for their support of this project and for their support in hosting this webinar today. I am going to give you a little bit of background about what motivated our project on asset building. Iowa, Minnesota, and North Dakota were 3 of 7 states that participated in a community-based project called Horizons. This project was funded by the Northwest Area Foundation and was completed in conjunction with Extension in those 7 states. The project's aim was to build leadership and to reduce poverty in rural communities. No small task. The work was done in 3 phases. Individuals and volunteers in the communities learned about poverty. A select group went through a leadership development course, and then the 3rd phase involved strategic planning to identify needs, to form work groups, and actually take action in the local community. The goal we felt of our project today was to look more closely at what might be the next steps, focusing particularly on asset building as a pathway to helping rural families achieve financial security and opportunity in the long run. So our research questions were quite straightforward. We wanted to assess needs and to explore what assets do rural, low, and moderate income families perceive to be of greatest value in getting ahead financially, in moving up the economic ladder? But also, what barriers do they perceive, and what do they see as promising directions for building family assets? We realize that this work bridges 2 paths, and it's interesting to look at the poll and see that we have people whose work is primarily in the field of community development, some who work primarily with families, and a number of you who work in both arenas. Our project really builds on 2 streams of research and practice. There is a lot of work underway in rural development that is taking a wealth creation approach to economic development rather than focusing solely on job creation. And similarly, in the field of family economics, there's been a real evolution of thinking about how best to promote family economic well-being, moving similarly from a focus on income to a much greater emphasis on the importance of building assets or wealth in families. We think that bridging these 2 fields yields a more holistic approach to shaping effective community-based strategies. Our approach was to use focus groups. We formed and recruited 2 different focus groups in communities. One that was composed of parents, low and moderate income parents living in families with dependent children. And the second focus group was one of community leaders. We did these focus groups in 2 rural communities that had participated in Horizons in Iowa, Minnesota, and North Dakota. So we ended up with data from 12 focus group interviews with a total of 77 participants in 6 communities in these 3 states. We recorded the focus groups, transcribed them, and then were involved in an analysis. Our interview guide really boiled down to these 4 questions. What does it mean to be successful and to get ahead financially? What are the challenges? What could this community do? And how does the fact that this is a rural community either help or hinder families wanting to get ahead? In the next section of our webinar, we're going to be sharing findings related to the barriers that were discussed and the strategies that the focus groups identified. We use traditional qualitative methods to look for themes among the barriers, and our team came up with these 3 levels or spheres of barriers: individual and family, community, societal, and then our strategies are broken down into those that focus very specifically on youth, adults, and then an other category. I'm going to turn this over to Rosie, who will start our discussion of barriers.
Thank you, Cindy, for sharing the structure of the study. And so now I'll begin to share some of the findings with you. I'm going to move right on to this particular slides, because this is an invitation to you, for you to participate with a chat box question. In this, we would like you to share your thoughts and answers on the chat box if you wish to do so, because each of us has our own unique experience in rural areas, and from that experience, we would like you to share, if you wish, what barriers you think rural families face in asset building. I will just go ahead and continue my presentation as you chat online. And I'm going to start the brief summary of our findings from our focus group participants. The family group and the community leader groups really yielded similar results, so we are not going to report the findings separately. Overall, the meaning of financial success and getting ahead was very modest. Building assets was often mentioned as simply getting ahead. The examples of success shared by study participants were unpretentious, they were basic, and they were down to earth. They told us what success meant, that it meant possessing skills to get a good job and manage the income so you don't have to live paycheck to paycheck. It meant having sufficient income to take care of present day needs and putting money aside for emergencies. Children's education, or for putting money aside for retirement. They discussed the importance of a job with benefits, particularly affordable health insurance, to being successful financially. And the participants also talked about the subjective side of financial success. And by this we mean that they included having a positive work ethic, having a supportive family and friendship base, being able to make informed choices, being content or happy, and not having to worry about money, and the ability to donate back to the community, either through volunteering or financially, as a sign of success also. This moved ahead a little bit too fast for me. There. So let's first take a look at the individual and family barriers. And the first one here that was identified by the participants was personal decisions and lifestyle choices. They also included limited financial management resources, lack of education and job skills, and transportation. We'll take a look at those factors as well. But first of all, when we take a look at personal decisions and family choices, the focus group participants describe values, priorities, instant gratification, keeping up with the Joneses, and living beyond one's means, all feeding into lifestyle choices that work against asset building and often leading to heavy debt burdens. Some community leaders noted, of course, that they generally were older and with grown children. They were critical of the spending decisions they observed among young families, yet they recognize that they too have raised their own consumption expectations and spending patterns. Others noted that not everyone has the same resources or skills, and therefore we should be careful about criticizing others' choices. Community leaders voiced strong opinions that children need to be instilled with a culture of saving. Too many families are prone to overextending their spending using readily available credit cards. Participants reported that some young people don't know how to work, others don't want to work for low wages, and some have a different work ethic. Often not showing up or not paying attention to regular hours were commonly listed in this area of work ethic. Also cited were criminal or drug histories or poor credit records. Past actions make it very challenging to find employment and begin anew, especially in a small community where everyone knows everyone. It is perceived that these individuals have limited choices for employment and there are few programs available to help them. And participants also told us about a fear of change. Some individuals fear moving away from their community for better job opportunities because they have a certain comfort level where they're at. Some participants viewed this as short-sighted and a reason some limit their own potential to get ahead. Participants cited a lack of basic money management skills as a barrier of getting ahead as well. There was discussion about the need for long-range planning, goal setting, and budgeting skills. Families seem to lack a long-range vision for what they want. Poor management skills combined with few resources have led to past financial mistakes that limit current options. Failing to establish emergency savings, start retirement savings, and having to raid long-term savings to meet emergencies were examples of decisions that were described as mistakes. Also highlighted was a lack of consumer decision-making skills to sort out persuasive messages. Two sides to this coin were noted. Consumers are vulnerable to predatory strategies, but unbiased information and guidance is lacking in a marketplace so intent on selling. Credit traps were acknowledged. The push by mortgage lenders to encourage taking out the largest loan one qualifies for, and the tactics of car dealers that push the most expensive vehicle purchased on credit rather than a less expensive vehicle that one might be able to buy with cash were examples described by focus group participants. They saw a need for a financial education so consumers aren't victimized. And at the same time, they described the many challenges of organizing and encouraging participation in adult education in rural communities. Discussion led to the value of teaching financial literacy skills to children in the schools so that positive habits are established early and mistakes observed among adults would be avoided. Both leader and family focus groups described the need for post-secondary education, job training, and continuing education to improve oneself as a prerequisite to higher earnings in today's economy. Participants recognized that upward job mobility would require more training and most likely a need to commute to good jobs. Few rural communities offer specialized job training or well-paying jobs. There was acknowledgement that some residents work multiple jobs to make ends meet, leaving little time for further training. In some instances, families and employers are reluctant to encourage post-secondary or continuing education, believing it will cause individuals to leave the community for a better job. There was much discussion about the importance of building human capital in the next generation, educating youth about career choices, options for financing higher education, and the value of post-secondary education. There was a strong preference that this be school-based so that all youth, including those whose parents did not go to college, would learn about career opportunities and aspire to continue their education after high school. In comparison to the barriers that adults in rural communities face, focusing efforts on youth was viewed as a promising long-term strategy. So now we'll take a look at also the final one that was listed, and that was the barrier dealing with transportation. Lack of affordable, dependable transportation often limits employability, especially for jobs outside the community. Focus group participants told us that well-paying jobs almost always require commutes to larger communities. Lack of affordable, reliable vehicles and the ongoing costs of commuting are challenges. And when I take a look at this picture we included on the slide, luckily as of today, gas in Minnesota was down to $2.95. So at least we've had some improvement there. Questions were also raised about the feasibility of carpools or other rideshare systems, but in a general sense that despite the cost, personal vehicles and the independence that they provide are highly preferred by the people in the rural communities. Jeannie, I think you're next.
Thank you, Rosie. The focus group discussions identified some ways that the community infrastructure directly affects families, and I'm going to highlight 5 community barriers and then talk about some societal barriers as well. Mentioned often was the lack of employment opportunities, and I see some of you who are responding in our chat box identified that. Certainly low wages and the lack of well-paying jobs with benefits for breadwinners was certainly one factor. There was discussion about the lack of local part-time jobs, particularly for youth. And then some of the community leaders who have been directly involved in economic development efforts describe the challenges that they face as they try to grow the number of jobs in small rural communities. A second community barrier was the lack of basic goods and services. In many small rural communities, there simply are not the convenience of local goods and services, and the example often given was no grocery stores. And for some, that meant a lack of healthy food choices being available to them. The goods and services in rural communities typically come with higher prices, they indicated. Many of the participants talked about having to travel regularly to larger towns and combining shopping with other tasks, and they perceive that as a way to cut costs. So certainly the commuting costs reduce net income and they add to the cost of purchases made in other communities. So the lack of local goods and services generally is viewed as a compromise that they make and have to deal with as they live in small towns. Certainly other limitations that were noted were affordable housing, lack of affordable housing, lack of child care. In banking services, they talked about if one had poor credit history, it was very difficult to get an affordable loan. And then the minimum balance requirements on accounts create a barrier for those who have tight budgets. Also mentioned was lack of mental health services. So these are really complex issues for these rural communities. Moving on, a couple of other community barriers, the lack of adult and school-based youth educational programming. Much of the discussion centered on the lack of accessible and relevant financial education. Participants in the groups clearly see the need, but they talked about the challenge of trying to reach busy adults with that timely financial education. The conversation also focused on youth, realizing that there was a need for not only basic financial education, but education to help families figure out how they could prepare for and apply to post-secondary education. And this was especially a concern for those parents who did not have education beyond high school. The belief was that they maybe didn't know about financial aid. Some of the kids might not even know it was possible to go to college. So participants viewed a very important role for parents in terms of financial education, but they also felt that the schools could be doing some more. Another barrier was the idea of a stigma in rural communities. The conversations focused around those who actually need assistance and the fact that they cannot get the help they need without the assurance of confidentiality, because in small communities everybody knows everybody. There was a sensitivity to participating in activities that identify individuals or families as possibly having problems or needs. And the fifth community barrier was the challenge of building that sense of community. It's very difficult, participants said, to build a sense of social support and get families involved with community projects when so many commute to jobs outside of town. So the long work hours and the travel time reduces the free time that the families have to contribute to community activities. And at least one community had a significant number of older residents who spend the winter months elsewhere, so they were just simply not available to provide leadership or to participate year-round in community projects. And as the quote here says, they're here to sleep, they go out of town to do groceries, to go to church, so we just don't know people anymore. Now, in addition to the community barriers, the focus group participants acknowledged that many of the individual and community barriers to asset building exist within the context of social and economic conditions in our society that work against asset building. The inadequacies in the infrastructure that I'm referring to are not just rural issues. Focus group participants identified characteristics of a national economy. We have a labor market that offers very few good jobs with benefits, and the living cost increases that outpace low wages are significant barriers to family asset building. There's a lack of affordable and accessible work supports in the areas of childcare, transportation. This challenges both rural and urban families. The lack of public transportation systems that serve those multiple trip demands that I mentioned earlier persist across the country. Certainly, affordable health insurance and accessible health care services are system issues nationwide as well. Other societal barriers, saving was perceived as perhaps countercultural, particularly in our consumer society where it's so easy to get credit and we have instant gratification rather than thinking about thrift and saving. We have a predatory marketplace. It siphons off potential asset building due to costly fees associated with credit purchases and financial transactions. And then finally, lots of attention has been given to the importance of post-secondary education, and the rising costs of this advanced training or education leads to the growth of student loan debt. And so it's very difficult for families to build assets and pay off their significant debt. So these barriers, the individual family barriers, the community barriers, and the societal barriers are identified by the focus groups, offered us some unique insights into possible community-based strategies that could be supported and sustained in rural communities. And so I'm going to turn it back to Cindy to continue with that discussion.
Thanks, Jeanne. It's been interesting to look at the responses in the chat box, and many of you clearly understand the barriers that rural communities and families face. I'm particularly interested in Connie's reply that hope is a significant barrier, and I think some of our ideas that came from the focus groups relate to youth begin to address that issue. As Jeanne said, our focus groups were asked to share their own ideas about what communities could do to address these huge issues. Interestingly, much of the discussion really took the long view and talked about the need to train youth so that they have the skills to compete in today's job market, and that the earlier we start, perhaps we can build a culture of savings among the youth. I'm going to talk about 5 different strategies that our research team discerned from these discussions. We also listened to the focus groups and came up with 4 criteria that the participants said were important, ideally, in youth strategies. One is that youth capacity and capability would change. Secondly, that there would be some parent involvement. A third characteristic would be that the community would be involved. And the fourth would be one that has been mentioned, that it would have universal outreach to all the youth in the community. So the first idea that we have generated is that of child savings accounts. This one, on the one hand, is a relatively new idea backed by some empirical research that shows that children's savings accounts do make a difference. But actually, everybody on this webinar knows that children's savings is a very old idea. A number of demonstration projects around the country has shown that establishing children's savings accounts at an early age, seeded by an initial deposit coming from the community, then allowed to grow through contributions from the children, their families, or others, do have positive outcomes. These accounts are typically earmarked for post-secondary education. The accounts actually gain meaning to children, though, by combining this activity with financial education that oftentimes can involve their parents. These benefits have literally financial assets accruing, but also have been shown to influence children's aspirations. Michael Sheridan, who has done a lot of the conceptual work on asset building for children, calls such financial assets hope in concrete form, addressing that very challenging barrier of a lack of hope. A second strategy that we have come up with, again, is not particularly unique and is growing across the country. The idea that we think is very doable is the in-school banking programs, where typically a financial institution sets up shop in the school once a week, allowing students to deposit their savings in the school bank. This gives children an opportunity to carry out the act of savings in addition to learning about this concept abstractly in the classroom. A third strategy that we think has merit are academic incentives. Community-based efforts that reward academic success send a very clear message to children that studying and continuing their academic progress is important. Again, financial institutions or other community groups can come forward with funds to reward children for good grades by establishing savings accounts and depositing funds each term that the student succeeds. Community-funded scholarships at the time of high school graduation is another form of the community stepping forward with academic incentives that pave the way for rural children to engage in post-secondary education. What this does is send the clear message that the community values and supports the academic progress of their children.
Bruce has an interesting question there in terms of the savings. Was it just deposits, or were there stocks or other things?
No, the programs that I'm aware of have been pretty traditional savings accounts rather than other types of investments that have been community-based. Good question, though. Okay, a twist on mentoring. A number of the conversations in these communities mention the importance of role models in the area of building financial skills and career decision making. So another idea that we bring forward is the idea of mentoring our children with regard to financial skill development and career choice. And again, this gives that connection to those children who may not be having those conversations in their own homes. And finally, this recommendation goes beyond a community-based solution to a policy choice. A final strategy that we talk about is targeting youth from low and moderate income families to have greater incentive to participate in what most states offer as college savings programs, oftentimes called 529 plans after the section of the law, that have particular tax advantage status. But those benefits really are meaningless to very low income families. So a number of states have created incentives that encourage low and moderate income families to save using 529 accounts, which in fact do typically have a number of investment options ranging from more traditional savings to investments in equities through mutual fund programs. So those are some specific ideas that we would offer back to communities that target youth and asset building. And now I'm going to turn back to Rosie, who's going to talk about some strategies for adults.
Thank you, Cindy. Now we're going to take a quick look at some asset building programs for adults that came up through the research. And the first idea was to include financial education for adults and have scholarships available also for non-traditional students who want to train or retrain for specific careers. And these were the two primary strategies identified by the focus group participants for assisting adults. Although education was a common theme in both families and leaders' focus groups, there were concerns over the challenges of getting people to attend educational programs, the transportation needs, and the subject matter being something not really accepted by those that really should attend. Nonetheless, the financial literacy education came up in focus group as an important component of most strategies for building assets in individuals and families. Important among the suggestions was integrating financial education into daily settings, maybe through possibly preschool settings, work sites, and other community organizations. Jobs and personal skills training was also mentioned as an asset building strategy, and this included training for specific trades to technology skills training to assist individuals in doing their jobs better. Local community supported scholarships for non-traditional students. Those adults who want to go back to school would help adults who may not have a career path identified at high school graduation develop more of a career path. And as we talked about mentoring with children, there was also mentoring mentioned for adults. Mentoring families was suggested as an alternative opportunity to provide advice and support and information to young families or those that had a specialized need for assistance. Individuals that have financial skills and life experiences might be willing to mentor others within their community. And this could serve many families better than going to an educational class. And among the education within small communities, there was also a perceived need for financial training to help small businesses understand employee benefits and proven options and strategies that help employees build assets. One quote was, I employ 25 people. I would like to offer them a 401k. I don't even know how to start. So this is an opportunity in small business education as well. Dealing with the transportation issue is a tough problem to deal with in rural areas. Helping families get and maintain a reliable car through a donation or an affordable car loan or saving for a vehicle through a match savings program, these were all ideas that were mentioned. These match savings programs would be similar to the IDA programs or individual development account. That's what IDA stands for, which generally are available in most states and most areas of the country, but are limited right now to buying a home for education or small business development, making the, opening up the possibility maybe these could also be done in relation to vehicle purchases. There is an example of a low-cost car loan program for communities that communities could explore, and that's offered to Ways to Work. It's a group that's based out of Milwaukee, but they have programs that are available. There were programs available both in Minnesota and Iowa. I didn't see anything listed from North Dakota. But you see a website listed here on this particular slide where you can get more information on this particular program. So I'm going to turn it back now, or I'm going to turn the microphone over to Trish now to continue on.
Thanks, Rosie. The next section, we're going to talk about other strategies in asset building beyond the youth and adult strategies that we've already talked about. We're calling these strategies some indirect strategies that can lower the barriers to family asset building in rural communities. And those include better access to affordable health care, access to child care, and reliable transportation. We're calling these strategies indirect because they don't seem to fit neatly into a mathematical equation to calculate assets. In addition, community is also was also indicated as a strategy, and it's beyond the brick and mortar of a community, the street signs of the businesses. But community was defined as strong networks, connections, and trusting relationships. I'd like you to just take a moment to look at those four topics and strategies, again, to build family assets. Think about it. We've seen them before. They were discussed earlier as barriers. I'm often called Pollyanna, so I think this is a fitting section for me to talk about that things that are often thought of as negatives can also be thought of as positives. And so let's explore these four a little further. Healthcare. This is a moving target for many of us. We're really intrigued and interested in this topic. Healthcare came up often as a barrier to getting ahead in building individual assets and wealth. And healthcare costs have become really quite unmanageable for many. And there's a lot of uncertainty with the recent policy changes. What will happen after the Affordable Care Act goes into place? One community even suggested looking at starting their own healthcare insurance through the local chamber. This is an arena that is a moving target, but it's one that as leaders in the community, we need to follow and think about how the public policy will impact asset building in the future. The next strategy, again, for helping build assets is about childcare. Childcare is a significant challenge in many rural areas. Access to quality care is limited, and at times parents have to drive out of town to bring their child to a childcare facility. There were a lot of suggestions that were made that local government entities could support childcare through a variety of ways. And some of them were rather simple, was getting some empty buildings up to code and cleaned up and accessible for a childcare provider to provide care there. Persistence is often a key at the community level. One community, it took 7 years to organize a daycare in their public school for the community. And guess what? They're now lamenting that they didn't make it big enough because it's so popular. So a lot of persistence and patience is involved with many of these strategies. We've talked quite a bit already about transportation. This happens to be a photo from my home area called Rainbow Rider in west central Minnesota. It is a public transportation option for a number of rural communities in west central Minnesota. While transportation was suggested as a barrier for many focus groups, but there were a lot of creative suggestions on how to alleviate this challenge, from van pools to volunteers providing shared rides. There are many transportation strategies shared, but most groups agreed that a private vehicle often becomes the primary option for rural families. There's a real codependent relationship between wages and transportation. One rural resident said, if you're working outside of town, you have to have quite a wage to just afford transportation back and forth, and you need a dependable vehicle. From an access perspective, one low-income resident described the need for honest used car dealers and honest car repair people who are willing to work on cars that have been used, and I'm saying it, used quite heavily. I thought these were really creative solutions that folks had. One community had a community member who provided free clinics for women to help them do their own car maintenance, so at a much more affordable cost. Embracing these rather low-cost ideas can make a huge difference in the ability to build assets at the family level and, in turn, at the community level. So I really enjoyed the transportation ideas our focus groups had to alleviate the problems. And finally, community events was identified and discussed as opportunities to help residents better support and connect with one another. As people increase the ties with their community, they can provide support to each other that isn't often found at a professional assistance programs. One community member said, well, there's a lot of support in our community, such as when somebody gets ill, they do a benefit to help with their insurance or pay the costs. It's amazing the amount of community support that comes out for things like that. So that's one example, and many of us have probably been at a pancake dinner or sloppy Joe dinner to help support someone who's been ill or injured. But the community ideas that came from our focus groups went well beyond these ideas. There were other types of social support that were offered. And one that you might find interesting was one community offered a Zumba class, which started to bring in a large number of people. 35 to 40 people in one rural town attended Zumba each night. And no matter if they knew the moves or not, they were there. Something was happening in that Zumba class that went well beyond fitness. It was the connections that they were making each other. While the Zumba class can be fun, or for some, quite painful, it had a dual goal of connecting people in the community. And while community members can connect on a basic task, they are really helping each other. One rural community member said, I think it's about a sense of success. I think our community would be much more thriving mode if we had more of a sense of a community and participating. It's more than the dollars. When we help each other with little things like mowing the grass or painting a house and being more neighborly, that's what I think as far as community, to be community-minded. It was really fascinating, the ideas that folks did have around what their community could do, from simple events that generate social support. Now we'd like to ask you to put in some of your ideas. Maybe some of the ideas that we have shared up to this point have generated some ideas for you. Could you share in the chat box, and we'll look at those, what additional ideas that you're aware of that communities, think of at the community level, have used to support asset building in their community. And let's see if we can get everybody to participate in this chat.
I'm not seeing a lot of typing.
I'm not.
Here we go. Okay, people are starting to type. Yeah.
I was thinking, have I been on mute the last 5 minutes?
Yeah. That's, well, while we're waiting for that, I'll just throw out a question for any one of you. What about ideas in terms of helping people understand what some of the opportunities might be in the community? You know, it seems like oftentimes I'll notice that a newcomer will come into the community and you know, right away spot opportunities and open a business and be successful at that. You know, and that opportunity might have been there for, you know, forever and hasn't been taken up. And so, what about any thoughts on that?
I think some of those car examples were a reflection of that, where certain people were really looked to as far as giving help with affordable cars or affordable car maintenance or free car maintenance to families that are on work programs. So that I think that often shows up in those examples. I'm just excited about these ideas people are sharing.
Yeah, and I'm expanding up the chat box a little bit so everybody can see the
thank you.
change there.
Susan Kerr mentions interesting that I don't know that really came up in our discussions at all about the internet and cell phone service for rural communities for safety, education, and employment. That's a really excellent idea, but I'll ask my colleagues on the study. I don't remember much about that coming up as we ask folks for their creative ideas for solutions and or barriers.
Sue Barnes asked about the archive, and the archive address is located in this box I'm wiggling right now. So all of our webinars are recorded and posted there.
And just for Scott, does the chat box then show up in the recorded webinar also? The great ideas that are being created here?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so that's a great way for folks who might want to go back and look at this. And can we get a copy of the slides? Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, we post those right next to the webinar archive link, so those will be up there too.
We know that quality adult education is about drawing from the information of the participants, right? And the purpose of the chat was really to ask folks. We talked to six focus groups representing six communities, but we know that there's a lot of other great ideas out there. So I appreciate. Do any of my colleagues want to comment on what's showing up on the chat box?
And Barb wanted to know if you've got a summary of the study someplace too.
I believe what we have. Cindy, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. We are nearing completion of a final report, and the last slide of our presentation lists our email addresses. Feel free to contact any of us, and within about another week or two, we will be able to send you a report.
I'll move on with just our last few slides because we want to open it up to questions. And this is really thinking about from this study, what next? What else do we want to know? And we think that the communities involved in the focus group recognize the importance of developing opportunities for asset building in their towns. And the timing is right to move in this direction. There's growing evidence of the momentum to support the asset building approach and to boldly go there, to really name what we're doing as asset building. For example, the longitudinal research is providing evidence that in particular household savings are associated with children's later college success. And I think as professionals in this area that we really, blatantly talk about the benefits of small and large ideas in asset building. One example is one low-income mother shared during the focus group. She says, I now have a 10-year-old daughter, and I'm planning her future now. And she doesn't really know it. But I don't know what she's going to do yet, but I know that I've planned out what classes she's going to take. We're saving the money so she can attend college. So that, those types of opportunities around asset building generate a domino effect that is really exciting for us as professionals to work with. Earlier within this webinar, Cindy certainly shared the benefits, or we've all shared the benefits of children's savings accounts and the variety of ways to do that. And this is just a summary of some literature about how the kinds of outcomes that you can get from simply having a child's savings account set up, that they're more likely to go to have college aspirations. They're more likely to have better grades because they know that money is sitting there waiting for them to be utilized for post-secondary education. And those who, with a college savings account in their names, are 4 to 6 times more likely to attend college. It's amazing data that now we can build on in our work. You know, it really helps bolster our work in the communities to have this kind of data to share with our community partners. As we reflect back on our work, there were strong views about asset building with our youth, and we've talked about that a lot. In addition, in our report that we are going to be sharing at the end of or sharing where you will be able to access it, there outlines many promising directions for also targeting adults. And we hope that you will be able to, that you'll access those and think of those as a nice portfolio of options as you work in communities in asset building. Due to the time, I think I'll switch, I'll skip this chat because we really do want to get into specific questions that our participants might have. In summary, we do want to say that, you know, what we've talked about today is that we've identified some barriers, but at the same time, those barriers from the community perspective have been turned into opportunities for individuals, families, and communities to enhance asset building in rural communities. And we've described some strategies that rural communities have used to help in asset building. One low-income resident stated it well: I guess we have to try to stay positive. You can't walk away, and we can't give up, because we won't get anything done that way. And another resident said, I don't think there's any one idea that's a cure-all or anything. Little things help, and they go a long way. And if we do a bunch of little things, it's really going to help. So we hope that we have stimulated some ideas for you to build in your own asset building programming, and also given you a good foundation that as you share asset building strategies with your communities, there's a good research base to justify the kind of programming we're doing. So with that, I'll ask my colleagues if they have anything more to share, and we'll also look at the questions that you might be typing in the chat box.
Well, thanks for that. I'll throw out a question while we're waiting for people to input things. You know, one time I was doing a program, and I encountered a gentleman who was, you know, he was a graduate of really a top university, and had moved into this extremely rural community and made a life there. And you know, he said, I'm not planning to send my kids to college because then I'll lose them. What would you be, you know, how would you respond to that?
This is Cindy. I think we have all heard that in rural communities that are experiencing population loss, or at minimum what they feel is a brain drain of the best and the brightest going off and not returning. Actually, I was quite pleased in reading through our focus groups that at least the participants in these groups see that as quite short-sighted, that really knowing the correlation between education and income, the importance of education and advanced training to succeed in this economy, they really were taking the long view that investing in their kids that will have long-term payoffs for those children. And I think probably they are thinking most likely it will have benefits for that community in the long run.
Just to add to what Cindy said, I was impressed with the conversations because they said they weren't just thinking about their own children, but they were thinking about the children of other families who maybe hadn't had those opportunities or whose parents had not had the opportunity to go for higher education. And so what they were suggesting would be programs and education for all children, not just a certain group or a certain faction. So I think that supports what Cindy was saying.
Yeah,
I don't have any studies to. Oh, go on, Scott.
I think that, and also maybe looking for ways to make sure that those college-educated kids do see opportunities for them coming back. Maybe working on that dimension of it. That you're going to go away for a little while, but here's some things that you can do when you come back.
I also saw that Chuck had mentioned something about on entrepreneurship training. That with internet and ways to do things from a distance, that having an education and using your education doesn't necessarily anymore need to mean going to the big city. Many people are doing a telecommute or a modified work arrangement, and that the education can be used from different locations than they used to be. But like I said, I don't have a study to say about that. But
well, there seemed to be a few comments that came in about entrepreneurship here, and Susan, I think Susan Shockey had a good summary question there. Did people talk about youth entrepreneurship in your focus groups?
Yes. In a couple of the focus groups, that there was some discussion that in the list of topics that they feel need to be included in the schools is not only personal financial education, career opportunities, but there was discussion of the importance of teaching children about entrepreneurship. And there's a little bit of information in our report about that curricula available.
Well, good. And I've opened up the webinar evaluation, so just click the boxes that apply as we're waiting for more questions to come in on the chat box. What was the most surprising thing that you found in your study?
Oh, this is Cindy. I think, for me, the fact that the conversation recognized that jobs are an issue in rural communities, but they move beyond that to taking the long view of putting education of children as a very high priority.
And Connie had a question about using this to encourage communities to be more entrepreneurial.
I would agree, and that I think means a number of different things. But what I heard in these focus groups is a lot of can do, that there are things that rural communities, given in essence the small scope that they have, that there are things that they can do that have an immediate impact and effect on the residents in those communities. And creative ideas definitely percolated in these conversations.
And then Cindy was wondering if the savings, basically, if that hurts access to scholarships later. You know, if you've got assets that gets taken into consideration when scholarships are computed. You want to comment on that?
Certainly.
Well, there's many, I'm sorry, Cindy, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, there's certainly so many scholarships that are available that really are about merit, you know, about what's happening, what is the youth doing. So while there are needs-based scholarships, there's many that are about merit or what the kids are doing. And especially if they're doing something creative, if they are helping and create their savings in an entrepreneurial way, will they ever have a lot to say in their applications for post-secondary school about their experience as being an entrepreneur or whatever. So I think that, you know, thinking of not building assets in lieu that I might hurt my chances toward getting scholarships could be, I think we need to frame it differently to think about what kind of, what asset building could really mean in the long, you know, when you think about what that savings meant for the families that starting savings early, that kids went to school, they wanted to go to school, they did better in school, all those things have a wonderful unintended consequence of just having the money in the bank. And those benefits way outweigh, I think, thinking I might not get a particular loan or grant if I have savings. But my colleagues might have another perspective.
Looks like some of the chatters are coming in with some ideas on that too.
Okay.
And then some other resources have come in, and Susan Kerr wants you to go to Pittsburgh next year, so be thinking about that. And I think that's where we've kind of come to the end of our time now, so we can turn off the recording.